Hello viewers, it's Josie. Welcome back to Eclectic Movie Reviews and Updates. School is back in session next week for my local school district, RBC schools. And obviously, most movie theaters were closed pretty much the entire summer. Uh, so I couldn't go to the movies. Instead, I decided to check out some cult classics. Um, before I talk about some of the movies I watched, I want to thank Brian Sauer and Elric Kane from the Pure Cinema podcast for introducing me to some of these movies, as well as their friend Aaron Penn, who has a YouTube channel, and another YouTuber. I might be butchering your name. I am. If so, I'm very sorry about that. Daisuke Beppu. He's from Tokyo, Japan, and he gave really good insights for two of the films I'm gonna discuss later in the video. Anyway, here I go. The first film I want to talk about on this list is Walkabout, directed by Nicholas Roeg. This is a coming-of-age adventure story about a brother and sister who go on an adventure in Australia with an Aboriginal boy. Shot by the director himself, it poetically captures the landscapes of Australia in a way that gives the location breath and life. By definition, a walkabout is a spiritual journey in which Aboriginal boys between 10 and 16 embark on, where they spend time in the wilderness, typically up to 6 months. The Aboriginal boy in the film is played by Aboriginal actor and dancer David Gulpilil. Forgive me if I'm butchering his name. Who would later appear in other movies, including Storm Boy, Peter Weir's The Last Wave, 10 Canoes, and Crocodile Dundee. Walkabout is currently streaming on the Criterion channel as well as Canopy. Next on my list is Harold and Maude from director Hal Ashby. I think most people know that this cult classic is about a 20-year-old boy and an 80-year-old woman who fall in love. To me, this is not just a love story between two oddballs with a big age difference. It's about creative inspiration. Through Maude, Harold is musically inspired. Music is such a key component in the film, I think. Despite him going woo-woo, the music by Cat Stevens is actually quite inspiring. My favorite track on the album for this reason is On the Road to Find Out. And when I feel like crying, I like to listen to Trouble. Harold and Maude is available to watch on Amazon Prime. Next on my list is a bit of a bonkers throwout, shout out I should say. On my birthday, my brother, his girlfriend, and I watched on Shudder Tammy and the Teenage T-Rex. This stars Denise Richards and Paul Walker. Paul Walker plays Denise Richards' dorky boyfriend, and of course Denise Richards is like the hot, popular girl in school, and after a bunch of bullies attack Paul Walker's character, he is taken by a scientist to have his brain put in the body of a T-Rex. Words cannot describe the hilarity that ensues. Once again, it's available to watch on Shudder, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it's available on Hulu. I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, I really wonder if Steven Spielberg has seen this movie, because it came out the year after Jurassic Park. And if so, I wonder if he, thought, Is my movie better or worse? Okay, moving forward. That was a bad joke. Moving forward, next on my list is Heavy Traffic, directed by Ralph Bakshi. This is an adult animated film. Please take note of that. Ralph Bakshi, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, also directed the animated Lord of the Rings. Additionally, he directed the infamously X-rated adaptation of the R. Crumb comic Fritz the Cat. The semi-autobiographical narrative of Heavy Traffic follows a cartoonist named Michael Corleone, yes, that's his accidental name, as the people he interacts with in the gritty, grimy streets of New York serve as inspiration. Without giving too many spoilers away, it begins and ends with a live action sequence that is so meta. This framing technique illustrates how Michael's cartooning, in a way, serves as a catharsis to his frustration of the city life filled with sex, crime, and violence. Granted, this is not a film for everyone. There are scenes of violence and sexual content that are graphically disturbing. I mean, more disturbing than the most explicit sex scenes in certain live-action films. I'm not kidding. I cringed while watching them. I mean, still a great movie. Don't get me wrong. I wonder how ethical some of the scenes would be if the entire film was live action. Nevertheless, whether targeted for kids or adults, the beauty of animation as a medium is that it allows storytellers freedom to include elements that live action filmmaking can't always provide. It is available to rent for a few dollars on Amazon, and you can get it on Blu-ray through Shout Factory. I rented it through an interlibrary loan of a DVD. Okay, next on my list is Pow Wow Highway, directed by Jonathan Wax. This is a road trip movie centered on two Native American men named Buddy, played by A. Martinez, and Philip, played by Gary Farmer, as they tried to save Buddy's sister from jail after being racially profiled. After she was racially profiled. Buddy and Phil are, of course, opposites, because that always makes for a great story. Phil is very spiritual, while Buddy is very practical and cynical. Buddy often laughs at Phil's mystical musings and allusions to the Native American trickster tales. The characters aren't whitewashed, so there is true authenticity to them. Calling attention for more Black representation, LGBTQ representation, stronger female roles, and more differently abled actors. Another minority group, just as deserving of having their voices heard, is Native Americans. And in that way, this film was before its time. Overall, Pow Wow Highway is a great best friend story, as well as a touching self-discovery narrative. Okay, moving on to Whiskey Galore from 1949, directed by Alexander McKendrick. This was his very first film before going on to do Lady Killers and Sweet Smell of Success. It is based on a novel by Compton Mackenzie, who plays Captain Bunker, I forget his, in the film. And it's also based on a true story. The narrative follows a group of people on an island called Today, yes, that's the name, who discover 50,000 cases of whiskey from a sunken ship. What unravels is competition between Captain Waggett and the villagers for the whiskey. What's great about this movie is that it's able to balance a whole ensemble in such a short running time of about 1 hour and 20 minutes. It is available to rent on Amazon for a few dollars. If you don't want to spend money, of course, you can see if your local library has the film. What I did was that I got an interloan of a Blu-ray double disc that contained Whiskey Galore as well as The Maggie, another boat-themed movie from Alexander McKendrick. Okay, next is The White Balloon from 1994, directed by Jafar Panahi. This is an Iranian film about a little girl named Razia, I might be pronouncing her name wrong, who wants to buy a goldfish for New Year's, but on her way drops the dollar her mom gave her to buy the fish. She drops the dollar her mom gave her to buy the fish in the sewer. The rest of the movie is about Razia trying to retrieve the dollar. What's great about this movie is that it takes something that on paper sounds so mundane for a movie, but because the story revolves around poverty in Iran, the idea of losing a single dollar is so catastrophic. What makes the conflict high stakes is Razia's fear of letting down her mother, especially since she was the one who warned her about losing it. It's a really inspiring story about trust and not giving up hope. For those interested in law of attraction and manifesting, it is a great movie to watch. It is currently streaming on the Criterion channel under the Saturday Matinee section, and The White Balloon, as well as other movies in the Saturday Matinee section on the Criterion channel, is an excellent opportunity for film buff parents who want to introduce kids to international cinema and classic cinema in a way that's digestible. That makes sense. And the next film I'm going to talk about is another movie that's streaming under the Saturday Matinee section on the Criterion channel, and that is The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, directed by Roy Rowland and written by Dr. Seuss. The story follows a boy named Bartholomew Collins and his family plumber as they try to save Bart's mother and other piano-playing children from an evil piano teacher named Dr. Terrywinkler holding them hostage. I mean, Dr. Terrywinkler is like the most villainistic name I've ever heard. Fun fact, the actors who played the mother and the plumber were married in real life until they died. This movie is extremely strange and bonkers in the best way possible. It's also a musical in the stylistic vein of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So if you're a fan of that movie, I recommend you check this out. Also, the Technicolor is absolutely gorgeous. If this were to be remade in modern times, the one person who I can see doing it is Taika Waititi. And I don't know, like, how old the kid might be too old in the next few years, but imagine getting the kid from Jojo Rabbit to play Bartholomew Collins. That would be awesome. I mean, if not, we could get like another kid. But anyway, now this is the part of the video that I'm really excited for. After the death of George Floyd and the riots that followed, I checked out the African American Spotlight on the Criterion channel. I was curious to discover more history involving African Americans, particularly their role in cinema, the past 100 years dating back to the silent era. The Criterion channel currently has a collection called Pioneers of African American Cinema, which has the race films. These were movies made from the silent era to the 1950s. They were made by blacks for black audiences and starred black actors. Given that the race films were not created under the Hollywood studio umbrella, several were overlooked by film critics and scholars. This changed in the 1980s when the race films were shown on BET Network. Now they are being rediscovered again thanks to the Criterion Channel. Kudos to them. Coming across this section, I checked out the films of Oscar Micheaux. He was a big influence on several black filmmakers, including Spike Lee and John Singleton. Spike Lee even calls Micheaux his idol. The words on his grave, "a man before his time," are absolutely fitting. Without further ado, because I could do a whole video on this, I chose Within Our Gates and Symbol of the Unconquered. Both were released in 1920, so 100 years ago, for this list because they are both responses to the infamous Birth of a Nation. Rather than portraying black people in a way that made it seem like they deserved to be lynched and brutalized for barbaric behavior, Within Our Gates and Symbol of the Unconquered flips that. The horrors of lynching are depicted. Nevertheless, it is not as simple as portraying the black people as good guys and the white people as bad guys. Oscar Micheaux's films were more complex than that, and they depicted tensions between the black community as well. One of the facts I learned from watching his films that I never learned in school was that there were light-skinned black people, who passed off as white. It's amazing what they don't teach you in schools. But I'm not going to try to give too much plot away because I really want people to see these films for themselves because they're absolutely brilliant. Within Our Gates is about a mixed-race black woman named Sylvia trying to open up a school for black children living in poverty. And we see the rigorous process of her trying to get the funding for it. Later in the film, we get a deeper backstory into Sylvia's parentage. Again, without delving too deep into spoilers, there's a flashback of a violent mob scene involving the KKK. Nonetheless, it was so inspiring to see such a persevering black woman on screen, especially for the time period. Given the hostility of the mob attack, it is no wonder the Board of Censors tried cutting scenes out. Within Our Gates was lost until the 1970s, when a print called La Negra was found in Spain. In the beginning of the 1990s, the Library of Congress finally restored it. Even so, one of the scenes from the middle of the narrative are not included. It makes me wonder what the missing scene or scenes could have been. I assume they must have been controversial enough for the Board of Censors to remove it. Regardless of what scenes are kept or not, the bulk of the surviving footage from Within Our Gates and the next film I'm going to talk about, Symbol of the Unconquered, exemplify Micheaux as a filmmaker who made audiences it exemplified Micheaux as a filmmaker who really went out of his way to make audiences feel compassion for the blacks and understand how horrific the violent white supremacy of the KKK is. Similarly, Symbol of the Unconquered features a strong female protagonist and has biracial characters. The story is about a light-skinned black woman named Yvonne Mason, who's also called Eve, who inherits land from her grandfather. When Eve discovers the land, she and her neighbor Hugh Van Allen fall in love. Conflict arises when hotel owner Mr. Driscoll and a group of criminals try to acquire Van Allen's land. Fragments of this movie, too, are missing, and there are subtitles during those blank spots to title cards, during those blank spots to summarize what happened. While I'm not a person of color, As a female on the autism spectrum, I relate to what it must feel like to to what it feels like to face discrimination. While I have been fortunate to have had and still have support systems in my life that have been a great access for me to develop past possibilities of what may not have been accessible. However, I know that there is inadequacy throughout the country for individuals based on either race, gender, intellectual capacities, and physical limitations. Certainly, we have made progress from the time period in which these films were made. Nevertheless, the story is still evolving on how inclusion of those who have differences, whether it be in skin color, gender, physical, or intellectual functioning, is told in cinema. Cinema from the silent era onwards is a platform to express the stories that we all experience in one way or another. We can find commonality on the screen. In other words, there is something about seeing a story laid out in front of you that directs you to a similar part of your life where you can say, no, I get it. And finally, my two favorite film discoveries of the summer. I talked about them in my previous video for this series. Local Hero from 1983 and Being There from Hal Ashby. That came out in 1979. Quentin Tarantino, I hope you're listening, because when the new Beverly Cinema opens to the public, these two films will make a great double bill. I would call it making a big difference in a small way. Well, before I close, I would like to give a rundown of the titles of the movies again in case you missed them. Walkabout from 1971, directed by Nicholas Roeg. Harold and Maude from 1971, directed by Hal Ashby. Tammy and the Teenage T-Rex from 1994, directed by Stuart Raffle. Heavy Traffic from 1973, directed by Ralph Bakshi. Pow Wow Highway from 1989, directed by Jonathan Wax. Whiskey Galore from 1949, directed by Alexander McKendrick. The White Balloon from 1994, directed by Jafar Panahi. 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T from 1953, directed by Roy Rowland. Within Our Gates and Symbol of the Unconquered both came out in 1920 and directed by Oscar Michaud. And Local Hero from 1983, directed by Bill Forsyth, and Being There from 1979, directed by Hal Ashby. It was a pleasure sharing these recommendations with you all. You can follow me on Instagram at Eclectic Movie Updates. I am also on Letterboxd as Eclectic Movies. I have another series called Positive Poems. The Instagram page for that is at Positive Poems. I hope you liked this video. If so, and you want to check out more of my reviews or updates, you can click the like button and subscribe. It's been a pleasure talking about movies with you, my film discoveries of the summer. I hope you're all safe. Kids going back to school, stay safe and good luck, and have a nice return. Once again, thank you to the Pure Cinema podcast, Just the Disc podcast, and Aaron Pinn and Daisuke Beppu for your recommendations and insights. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.